Hello everyone and welcome back to Shadow Man Stories. I can picture some of you already in bed, maybe some of you just getting home from work. Wherever you are, whatever time it is, I'm glad you're here. If this helps you relax or sleep, please like and subscribe. It means a lot. Now, let's get you comfortable and I'll tell you tonight's story. My name is Ezekiel Montgomery, but everyone calls me Zeke. I've been walking these mountains for 43 years and working as a ranger in Shenandoah National Park for 16 of them. My great-granddaddy fought these same ridges during the war between the states, and my daddy taught me every trail, every creek, every hidden hollow in these ancient hills. I grew up hearing the old stories, Cherokee tales about spirits in the water, mountain folk legends about things that lived in the deep woods. Just old wives' stories to scare children, I always said. That was before October 1963, before I learned some stories are warnings wrapped up like fairy tales. The trouble started in late September. 3 young women had drowned in 6 weeks, all in different spots around the park. That might not sound like much to city folks, but in 16 years of ranger work, I'd never seen more than 1 drowning per season. These weren't accidents. They were impossible. First was Mary Beth Collins, a college girl from Richmond. Found her floating in Dark Hollow Creek, 5 miles upstream from where her friends said she'd gone swimming. The current there barely moves. Couldn't carry a leaf that far, let alone a person. 2 weeks later, Patricia Hayes, 21, swim team captain at UVA. They found her in a deep pool at the base of White Oak Falls, but her car was parked at Big Meadows, 6 miles away. No trails connect those places. No way she could have ended up there. The third was the worst. Jennifer Walsh from Georgetown. Her body turned up in still waters, a pond so shallow and calm that locals called it a mirror. She was an experienced swimmer, but somehow she'd drowned in 4 feet of water. All 3 heard the same thing before they died. Their friends said the same words. She heard a woman calling for help and went to look. That's when the Park Service sent me to investigate. My job was to map every water hazard in the backcountry and figure out what was killing these girls. I specialized in the remote areas, the places tourists never saw. If something dangerous was hiding in our waters, I'd find it. I started with Cataract Falls, 8 miles from the nearest road. You had to know the unmarked trail to find it. A secret place where water dropped 200 feet into a granite basin surrounded by hemlocks older than America. I'd been there dozens of times over the years. It was always peaceful, always safe. But when I hiked up there on October 15th, something felt wrong. The silence hit me first. No birds singing, no insects buzzing. Even the squirrels seemed to have vanished. The only sound was water crashing on rocks, louder than I remembered. I checked my thermometer when I reached the falls. Air temperature, 72 degrees. Perfect autumn weather. But when I dipped the instrument in the water, it read 51 degrees. That was impossible. Mountain water runs cold, but not 20 degrees colder than the air around it. I set up my camera to document the site. The Park Service wanted photos of all potential hazards. But when I developed the film later, every picture showed the same thing. A blurry white shape standing in the mist near the falls, like a woman in a long dress. My camera had never malfunctioned before. That night, I called my ex-wife Sarah in Richmond. We'd been divorced 6 months, fighting over custody of our daughter Emma. I needed to hear a familiar voice after the strangeness at the falls. "You sound tired, Zeke," she said. Her voice was soft, concerned. It reminded me why I'd fallen in love with her 15 years ago. "Just work stuff. Strange things happening in the park. Maybe you should take some time off. Come see Emma. She misses you." After we hung up, I sat on my cabin porch listening to night sounds, Doctor. Ifed up from the valley, owls hooting, coyotes yipping, normal sounds, safe sounds. I didn't know that in 3 days I'd hear Sarah's voice calling for help from Cataract Falls, and that, when I heard it, I'd understand why 3 young women had walked into the water to die. The 4th victim changed everything. Jennifer Walsh wasn't supposed to be in the park that day. Her roommate at Georgetown said she'd planned to study for midterms all weekend. But on October 18th, Jennifer packed a swimsuit and drove 2 hours to Shenandoah alone. I found her car in the dark hollow parking area at sunrise. The engine was still warm. Her purse sat on the passenger seat with her wallet and keys inside. No sign of struggle, no indication she'd been forced to leave. I followed the trail toward Cataract Falls, hoping I was wrong about where she'd gone. The unmarked path was hard to spot unless you knew what to look for. But Jennifer had found it somehow. Her footprints showed in the muddy spots, small sneakers, size 7, walking at a normal pace, not running, not being chased, just walking toward the falls like she had somewhere important to be. I found her bathing suit hanging on a branch near the water's edge, neatly folded, like she'd planned to come back for it. But Jennifer was floating face down in the deep pool at the base of the falls, her long brown hair spread around her like seaweed. She wore only underwear and a Georgetown University t-shirt. I waded in to pull her out, and the cold hit me like a physical blow. October in Virginia, but the water felt like January in Alaska. By the time I dragged her to shore, my hands were numb and my lips had turned blue. That's when I heard it. "Zeke! Zeke! Help me!" Sarah's voice calling from somewhere upstream, clear as if she were standing right beside me. But Sarah was in Richmond, 200 miles away. "Sarah," I called back. The voice came again, fainter now. "Help me, Zeke! I can't get out!" I knew it wasn't really her. It couldn't be. But the voice sounded so much like Sarah that my body reacted before my brain could stop it. I took a step toward the water. That's when I saw her. A woman stood on the ledge behind the falls, barely visible through the spray and mist. She wore a long dress that might have been white once but looked gray now, stained with water and time. Her dark hair hung loose around her shoulders, and her mouth was open like she was screaming. But I couldn't hear her voice over the roar of the water. She pointed downstream, toward where Jennifer's body floated. Then she pointed at me. Her expression was desperate, pleading, like she was trying to warn me about something. I blinked, and she was gone. My radio crackled to life. "Unit 7, this is base. What's your status on the water safety inspection?" I stared at the empty ledge where the woman had stood. "Base, this is Unit 7. I need a recovery team at Cataract Falls. We have another drowning victim." The recovery team arrived 2 hours later. Dr. Hamilton, the county coroner, examined Jennifer's body while I gave my report to Chief Ranger Morrison. "Same as the others," Dr. Hamilton said. "No signs of trauma, no indication of foul play. She just drowned." "In 4 feet of water," Morrison said. "A 20-year-old college student who was on her swim team in high school." "The water's unusually cold," I said. "Maybe cold shock? Could cause muscle cramps, disorientation." Morrison nodded, but I could see he wasn't convinced. Neither was I. As they loaded Jennifer's body into the ambulance, I noticed something nobody else had seen. Her fingers were wrinkled like she'd been in water for hours, but rigor mortis hadn't set in yet. She'd only been dead for minutes when I found her. That meant she'd been in the water all night, but had somehow just died when I arrived. Impossible. That evening, I drove to the Cherokee Reservation outside Luray to talk to Ayanna Crowfeather. She was 83 years old and knew more about local history than anyone alive. If there were stories about Cataract Falls, she'd know them. I found her sitting on her front porch, smoking a hand-rolled cigarette, and watching sunset paint the mountains purple. "Ranger Montgomery," she said before I could introduce myself. "I wondered when you'd come." "You know why I'm here?" 4 young women dead in water that should be safe. Your people are saying it's accidents, but you know better." I sat down in the chair beside her. "Tell me about the falls." Ayanna was quiet for a long time. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft as wind through dry leaves. "Cherokee call that place Nvi Asgaya Gvniuhi, water where spirits dwell. We never swam there, never drank from it. The water belongs to the dead." "What dead?" 1847. White settlers built a school near the falls. Young teacher named Sarah Whitmore. She was trying to keep Cherokee and white children together, Teach them all the same. Ayanna smiled sadly. Foolish white girl. Good heart, but foolish. What happened to her? Flash flood came down the mountain. School was in the path. Sarah got most of the children to high ground, but 12 couldn't make it. Little ones, 6 to 8 years old. Sarah went back for them. Ayanna dropped her cigarette and ground it under her heel. Found them all downstream 2 days later. Sarah and 12 children drowned together. But the Cherokees say Sarah's spirit never left. She's still trying to save those children, still trying to warn people away from the water. But people are dying, I said. If she's trying to warn them, spirits can't always control how the living hear their voices, Ayanna said. What sounds like warning to the dead might sound like crying for help to the living. I thought about Sarah's voice calling my name, how it had almost pulled me into the water. How do I stop it? Ayanna studied my face in the gathering darkness. You have Cherokee blood. I can see it in your bones. That's why you can hear her clearly. I'd never told anyone about my Chet. Roki great-grandmother. It wasn't something mountain families talked about openly in 1963. The spirits of the drowned children are keeping Sarah trapped, Ayanna continued. They're afraid to let go of the one adult who tried to save them. Until they find peace, Sarah can't rest. And until Sarah rests, more people will die. How do I give them peace? But Ayanna had already stood up and was walking toward her front door. You'll know when the time comes, she called back. Just remember, sometimes saving the dead is the only way to save the living. I should have closed the trail to Cataract Falls immediately, should have posted warnings, strung up barriers, done something to keep people away. But Morrison wanted concrete evidence before we restricted access to any part of the park. We can't shut down every swimming hole because of a few accidents, he said. So I compromised. I started patrolling the falls daily, hoping to catch anyone heading toward the water before they could get into trouble. It was October 20th when I realized the entity wasn't waiting for victims to come to her. She was hunting them. I was checking the trail markers around noon when I heard voices coming from the direction of the falls, a young couple laughing and talking as they hiked. I followed the sound and found them at the edge of the water, Tommy Castellano and his girlfriend Rebecca Marsh, both about 22, both wearing bathing suits despite the cold October air. Folks, I need you to step away from the water, I called out. Tommy turned around grinning. Morning, Ranger. Beautiful day for a swim, isn't it? It wasn't. The temperature had dropped overnight and gray clouds were building in the west, but both of them were sweating like it was July. The water's unsafe, I said. We've had several drowning incidents recently. Rebecca laughed, a sound like silver bells. Don't be sick. Illy, Lisa told us it was perfectly safe. Lisa? The woman we met on the trail, Tommy said. Sweet older lady in a white dress. Said she comes here all the time to swim. Told us that water's always warm because of underground springs. I felt ice form in my stomach. What did this woman look like? Dark hair? Kind of old-fashioned clothes, Rebecca said. She was so helpful. Showed us the best path down to the water. There was no one else on the trail. I'd been patrolling for 3 hours and hadn't seen another soul. I need both of you to come with me, right now. Something in my voice must have gotten through to Tommy. His smile faded, and he took Rebecca's hand. Is there really danger? Yes. But as I spoke, Rebecca suddenly tilted her head like she was listening to something. Her eyes went wide and excited. Do you hear that? She whispered. Someone's calling for help. I listened. Nothing but wind and water. Rebecca, there's no one. There. She pointed toward the falls. Can't you see her? There's a woman in the water. She's drowning. Rebecca broke away from Tommy and ran toward the pool. I lunged after her, but she was already diving in by the time I reached the water's edge. The cold hit her like a hammer. I watched her body seize up, her face go white with shock. She tried to swim back to shore, but her arms wouldn't work properly. Tommy, call for help, I shouted, then dove in after her. The water was so cold it felt like being stabbed with ice picks. My chest seized up and for a moment I couldn't breathe. but I managed to grab Rebecca and haul her towards shore. Tommy helped me pull her out. She was blue-lipped and shaking, but alive. "Did you see her?" Rebecca gasped. "The woman in the white dress? She was drowning, but when I got close, she just disappeared." I wrapped her in my jacket and got them both back to their car as fast as possible. Tommy cranked up the heater while I radioed for medical assistance. What the hell is going on out there? I asked myself as their car disappeared down the mountain road. That night, I stayed at the falls. If something was actively luring people into the water, I needed to see it for myself. I set up camp in the hemlocks about 50 yards from the pool, where I could watch the entire area, but remain hidden. The temperature dropped into the 40s after sunset, and I could see my breath in the moonlight. Around midnight, the mist began to rise. It started as wisps of vapor drifting up from the warm water. Normal for a cold night. But as I watched, the mist began to take shape. First, just suggestions, curves that might be arms, shadows that might be faces, then clearer forms. Children, 12 of them, standing in the shallow water at the edge of the pool. They looked solid enough to touch, but I could see the rocks on the bottom through their bodies. They ranged in age from maybe 6 to 10 years old, all wearing clothes from a different century, and standing behind them, waist deep in the pool, was the woman I'd seen before. Sarah Whitmore, the teacher who died trying to save them. She was beautiful, even as a ghost. Dark hair framing a kind face that would have been pretty in life, but her expression was desperate, anguished. She kept trying to herd the children toward shore, but they wouldn't move. They were afraid of something. That's when I heard footsteps on the trail behind me. A middle-aged man was walking toward the falls, moving like he was sleepwalking. His eyes were open but unfocused, and he wore only pajamas and slippers, despite the cold. I recognized him. George Whitten, who ran the general store in Luray. He lived 20 miles from here. What was he doing in the park at midnight? "George," I called softly, not wanting to startle him. He didn't respond, just kept walking toward the water. I looked back at the pool and saw Sarah waving her arms frantically, pointing at George. Her mouth was open like she was screaming warnings, but I couldn't hear her voice over the sound of the falls. The children began to scatter, fading back into mist. George reached the water's edge and started to wade in. The cold seemed to wake him up. Partially, he stumbled and looked around confused. "Where am I?" he called out. "How did I get here?" "George, it's Ranger Montgomery. Stay where you are. Don't go any deeper." But he was already chest-deep in the freezing water, and hypothermia was setting in fast. His movements became sluggish, uncoordinated. "I can't feel my legs," he said, his voice slurring. "There's something in the water, something touching me." I grabbed my rope and flashlight and waded in after him. The cold was brutal, but I managed to get a line around George and haul him to shore before he went under. As I dragged him onto dry land, I heard Sarah's voice clearly for the first time. "I'm sorry," she whispered. The words carried on the night wind. "I tried to warn him. I tried to warn them all. But they hear crying for help instead of warnings to stay away." I looked back at the water. Sarah stood in the shallows now, close enough that I could see tears streaming down her translucent face. "I know who you are," I said. "Ayanna told me about the flood." Sarah nodded. "The children won't leave me. They're afraid of what comes after. And as long as they're trapped here, my warnings become death calls. Anyone who hears my voice feels compelled to enter the water." "How do I help you?" "The children need to be properly laid to rest, Cherokee tradition. Ayanna would know the ceremonies." Sarah's form was already beginning to fade as dawn approached. "But beware, the ritual must be performed in the water where they died. It will require you to enter willingly, without my voice compelling you." "And if I don't?" Sarah's voice was barely a whisper now. "More will die, young women especially. My voice calls strongest to those who remind me of my students." George groaned and opened his eyes. "Ranger, what happened?" I helped him to his feet and walked him back to his car. He remembered nothing after Goet. lying to bed in Luray. Somehow, he'd driven 20 miles and hiked 8 more while completely asleep, or while something was calling him. As I drove George to the hospital, I realized the situation was worse than I'd thought. Sarah wasn't just warning people who came to the falls. She was actively drawing them there, whether she meant to or not. And the longer those children remained trapped with her, the stronger her uncontrolled influence would become. I had maybe days before someone else died, and the only way to stop it was to enter that deadly water myself. October 23rd. 3 days since George Whitten's close call, and I still hadn't worked up the courage to attempt the Cherokee burial ritual Ayanna had described. Maybe I was just scared. Maybe I was hoping for another solution that didn't involve willingly entering water that had already killed 4 people. I was running out of time. The call came at dawn. Jenny Morrison, the chief ranger's 18-year-old daughter, was missing. Her car had been found at the dark hollow parking area, keys still in the ignition. My blood turned to ice. Jenny was practically family to me. I'd taught her to identify bird calls when she was 10, helped her with science projects, watched her grow from a tomboy into a beautiful young woman with her whole life ahead of her. I drove to the falls faster than I'd ever driven on mountain roads before, praying I'd be wrong about where she'd gone. But I knew. Deep in my bones, I knew. Her footprints were clear in the mud beside the pool, size 8 sneakers, walking calmly to the water's edge. Her clothes were folded neatly on a rock, jeans, sweater, everything except her underwear and bra. But Jenny wasn't in the water. She was standing on the ledge behind the falls, swaying back and forth like she was dancing to music only she could hear. Her long blonde hair hung loose around her shoulder, and her skin had already turned blue from the cold. "Jenny!" I shouted. "Don't move, I'm coming to get you." She turned toward my voice and smiled dreamily. "Hi, Mr. Montgomery. Miss Sarah is teaching us to sing. Do you want to learn too?" That's when I saw them. The 12 children, transparent as glass, arranged in a semicircle around Jenny. They were holding hands and swaying in rhythm with her, their mouths open in silent song. And behind them, all stood Sarah Whitmore, her arms outstretched like a conductor leading a choir. "The children are ready now," Sarah called to me. "They trust you. They remember your Cherokee blood from their grandmother's stories, but you must come to us willingly. You must enter the water of your own choice, or the ritual won't work." I looked at Jenny, still swaying on that narrow ledge 20 feet above the deadly pool. One wrong step and she'd fall. The impact alone would kill her, never mind the freezing water. "Let her go first," I said. "Let Jenny leave safely, then I'll come." Sarah shook her head sadly. "I can't control it anymore. The boundary between worlds grows thinner each day. She hears our song as her own voice calling. Until the children are freed, she'll stay here and sing with us until she dies." What do I have to do? Swim to the deep center where the children drowned. Speak the Cherokee words Ayanna taught you. Call their spirits home to the ancestors. But know this, the water will fight you. It has tasted so much death that it hungers for more. And I won't be able to help you once the ritual begins. I stripped down to my underwear, my hands shaking from cold and fear. The October air felt like winter against my skin. "Ayanna gave you the words?" Sarah asked. I nodded. The old Cherokee woman had made me memorize the death chant in her language, though she'd warned me I might not survive speaking it in the cursed water. "Remember," Sarah said, "you must stay underwater while you speak all 4 verses. If you surface before the ritual is complete, the children will pull you down with them forever." I waded into the pool, gasping as the ice-cold water reached my chest. Every instinct screamed at me to get out, to find another way. But Jenny was still swaying on that ledge, and I could see her strength failing. In the center of the pool, the water was over my head. I took the deepest breath of my life and dove down. The underwater world was impossibly clear. Moonlight filtered through 20 feet of water, illuminating the rocky bottom where 12 small skeletons lay scattered like broken dolls. The children's spirits hovered above their bones, looking down at me with eyes full of hope and terror. I began to chant in Cherokee, the ancient words feeling strange on my tongue. Navdali Nidvi, Galvladi. Spirits of the water, listen. The water immediately began to fight me. Currents that shouldn't exist in a still pool grabbed at my arms and legs, trying to drag me deeper. I felt something wrap around my ankle, a hand made of water and malice. Unadawistanvi Galvladi Udeti. The children seek the path home. The temperature dropped even further. Ice crystals began forming on my skin underwater. My lungs burned with the need to breathe, but I was only halfway through the chant. The children's spirits were changing, becoming more solid. Their eyes glowed with ancient sadness as they reached toward me. Not to drag me down, I realized, but to steady me against the water's fury. Gadvyuhi, Navdali, Galiyahi. Release the bound spirits to fly. Something massive rose from the deepest part of the pool. Not Sarah. Something darker, hungrier. The accumulated malice of every death in these waters, given form and fury. It wrapped around me like liquid shadow, trying to squeeze the life from my body. My vision went dark around the edges. I had maybe 10 seconds of breath left, but 12 small hands were holding me up, giving me strength. The children's spites on. Ritz glowed brighter, ready to break free from their watery prison. I forced out the final verse. Navdali ani yui nunahi. Spirits go in peace to ancestors. The water exploded around me. Light erupted from the children's spirits as they finally found release. One by one, they faded into golden mist that rose toward the surface, carrying with it all the pain and fear that had trapped them for over a century. The dark thing that had tried to drown me let out a howl of rage and dissolved, its power broken by the completion of the ritual. I shot to the surface, gasping and choking, barely conscious from cold and lack of oxygen. The pool water was warm now, normal temperature for October. The oppressive atmosphere that had hung over the falls was gone. Sarah stood at the water's edge, solid and real for the first time. She was beautiful in life, as she had been in death. Maybe 25 years old, with kind eyes and a gentle smile. "Thank you," she said simply. "The children are safe now. They've gone to join their families in the spirit world." Behind her, Jenny Morrison sat on the rocks, wrapped in Sarah's white dress, confused but unharmed. "What about you?" I asked. Sarah looked up at the lightening sky. Dawn was breaking over the mountains, painting everything gold and rose. "My work here is finished. I can rest now." She turned back to me one last time. "Tell people to remember the children. Don't let their story be forgotten." She faded with the rising sun, finally at peace. The official report listed it as a rescue operation. Jenny Morrison had sleepwalked to the falls during a bout of illness and nearly died of exposure. Ranger Montgomery had successfully retrieved her from a dangerous ledge and provided emergency first aid until medical assistance arrived. Chief Ranger Morrison didn't ask too many questions about the details. He was just grateful to have his daughter back alive. Jenny remembered almost nothing of her time at the falls, just fragments, singing with other children, feeling wonderfully warm despite the cold, and a kind womb, and in white who told her stories about the old days. The Park Service posted warning signs around Cataract Falls. Danger, extremely cold water, swim at your own risk. They never officially closed the area, but somehow word got around that it wasn't safe. Visitors stopped going there. I went back once, 2 weeks later, to make sure the presence was really gone. The falls were just a waterfall now, beautiful, peaceful, normal. The water ran clear and clean, the right temperature for the season. Birds sang in the hemlocks, squirrels chattered in the branches. It was like the place had awakened from a long, dark dream. But I wasn't the same man who'd started investigating those drownings. The Cherokee side of my heritage, dormant for most of my life, had been awakened by contact with the spirit world. I found myself noticing things I'd never seen before. Signs and omens in nature, the way animals behaved around places where the veil between worlds was thin. I started spending time with Ayanna Crow Feather, learning the old stories, the traditional ways of understanding the world. She said, I had a gift now, a responsibility to watch for places and times when the dead might need help finding peace. You're a bridge walker now, she told me, living in both worlds. It's a hard path, but necessary. I never remarried Sarah. Our divorce became final in December, but we stayed in touch for Emma's sake. Sometimes, late at night, I'd catch myself listening for her voice on the wind. Not the supernatural call that had nearly killed me, but just her voice. The memory of what we'd lost. The drownings stopped, of course. Cataract Falls became just another scenic spot in the park, visited occasionally by hikers who never stayed long. They'd take their pictures and move on, never knowing 12 children and their teacher had found peace in those waters. But sometimes, early in the morning when the mist rises from the pool, local Cherokee report seeing something that makes them smile. 13 figures holding hands at the water's edge. 12 small children and one young woman, all glowing with soft golden light. They appear for just a moment, then fade into the dawn. The children are playing now, finally safe. And Sarah Whitmore watches over them not as a prisoner of tragedy, but as a guardian of joy. I keep their story alive, as Sarah asked me to do. I tell it to other rangers, to local historians, to anyone who will listen. Not as a ghost story, but as a reminder that some loves are strong enough to transcend death itself. And sometimes, when I'm patrolling the remote trails of Shenandoah, I hear children's laughter carried on the wind. Not calling for help, not crying in despair, just playing. The sound every teacher dreams of hearing from their students. The sound of spirits finally, truly, at rest. But I always listen carefully to the woods now, because Ayanna was right. I am a bridge walker. And somewhere in these ancient mountains, other lost souls might be waiting for someone who can hear their stories and help them find their way home. The dead have long memories, and sometimes they need a friend among the living to remind them that it's safe to let go. My name is Luther Pemberton, but everyone calls me Luke. I've been a forest ranger for 14 years now, and I've seen just about everything these Kentucky woods can throw at you. Bears, wildcats, illegal hunters, lost hikers, you name it, I've dealt with it. But what happened up on Copper Ridge in August of 1971, well, that's something I never expected to face. I grew up in coal country, learned to track and hunt before I could properly tie my shoes. My daddy worked the mines until his lungs gave out, and my granddaddy before him. The Pembertons have deep roots in these hills, though there's parts of our family tree we don't talk much about. My great-grandmother on my mother's side, she had dark skin and strange eyes that seemed to see things others couldn't. Folks whispered she was Melungeon, mixed blood, part Cherokee, part Portuguese, part who knows what. I never paid those old stories much mind. As a ranger in Daniel Boone National Forest, I specialized in wildlife management. When farmers complained about problem animals or when hikers reported aggressive bears, they sent me out to handle it. I had a reputation for solving cases that stumped other rangers, probably because I understood these woods better than most. Every deer trail, every water source, every cave where a scared animal might hole up. The assignment that changed everything started on a Tuesday morning in August. My supervisor, Bill Crawford, called me into his office with a worried look on his weathered face. "Luke, we got reports coming in from Copper Ridge," he said, sliding a manila folder across his desk. "Survey team's been up there for the recreational development project. They're claiming something's been stalking them." I opened the folder and read through the witness statements. 3 different surveyors, all claiming they'd seen a man watching them from the tree line. But when they tried to approach, the figure would disappear. One surveyor, a fellow named Jimmy Martinez, wrote that the man walked wrong, like his legs were too long for his body. "Sounds like a vagrant," I said. "Maybe someone's been camping up there illegally." Bill shook his head. "That's what I thought too, until this came in yesterday." He handed me another report. They found their equipment destroyed. Not stolen, destroyed. And Luke, the damage. It's like nothing I've ever seen. The photographs showed surveying equipment that had been torn apart with surgical precision. Metal rods bent into impossible shapes, expensive instruments ripped open but not randomly. More like something had studied how they worked before taking them apart piece by piece. Could be a bear, I offered, though I didn't believe it myself. Bears destroy things through brute force, not careful manipulation. With opposable thumbs, Bill raised an eyebrow. Look closer at those claw marks. I studied the photos again. The scratches in the metal were deep and evenly spaced, but there was something deliberate about them, almost like someone had been trying to write something. I want you to head up there today, Bill continued. Take a look around. See if you can figure out what we're dealing with. The development company's getting nervous and the state's breathing down our necks to get this resolved. I gathered my gear, rifle, binoculars, camping supplies, first aid kit, and loaded up my truck. The drive to Copper Ridge took me through some of the most isolated country in Kentucky. Dense hardwood forests pressed against the narrow mountain road, and cell phone service disappeared about 10 miles in. This was old country, the kind of place where families had lived for generations without much contact with the outside world. As I drove, I couldn't shake a strange feeling of familiarity. I'd never worked this particular area before, but something about the landscape tugged at my memory. The way the morning mist clung to the valleys, the specific shade of green in the oak, leaves, it all felt like a half-remembered dream. Copper Ridge itself rose up from the forest like a sleeping giant. Local maps showed it as largely unexplored, marked only with warnings about unstable terrain and abandoned mine shafts. What the maps didn't show was the history buried in these hills. I'd done some quick research before leaving, learning that a Melungeon settlement had existed here in the early 1800s. The community had thrived for about 20 years before something happened, something that made every last resident pack up and leave overnight in 1823. The locals I'd talked to while researching clammed up whenever I mentioned Copper Ridge. An old-timer at the gas station had looked at me with genuine fear when I asked for directions. "You don't want to go up there," he'd said, "especially not during the full moon." I'd laughed it off at the time. Mountain people were always full of superstitions and ghost stories. But now, parking my truck at the base of the ridge as shadows lengthened through the trees, I felt the first cold finger of unease trace down my spine. The survey team's base camp was about 2 miles up a barely visible trail. I shouldered my pack and started hiking, my trained eyes automatically cataloging every track, every broken branch, every sign of passage. The forest was too quiet. No bird calls, no rustling of small animals in the underbrush. Even the insects seemed muted. About halfway to the camp, I found the first strange track. It looked human at first glance, a bare footprint in a patch of soft mud beside a creek. But as I knelt to examine it closer, the details didn't add up. The print was at least 13 inches long, with toes that seemed too widely spaced. And there was something else, something that made my trained tracker's instincts scream warnings. The track was fresh, maybe an hour old, but it was changing as I watched. The edges were blurring, the distinct toe marks becoming less defined. It was like the mud was slowly reshaping itself, transforming the human footprint into something else entirely, something with claws. I photographed the track from every angle, though I doubted the pictures would capture what I was seeing. By the time I finished, the footprint had completely changed. What had been a human foot was now clearly the paw print of some large predator, but no predator I could identify. The survey camp was a mess when I reached it. 3 tents had been slashed open, their contents scattered but not stolen. Expensive surveying equipment lay in pieces, dismantled with the same careful precision I'd seen in the photographs. But there was no sign of the survey team themselves. I found their note pinned to a tree with what looked like a hand-carved wooden spike. "Gone back to town. Whatever's up here, it ain't natural. Don't stay after dark." J. Martinez. Smart men. I should have followed their example. Instead, I set up my own camp in a small clearing about a quarter mile from the destroyed survey site. The sun was getting low, painting the forest in shades of gold and deep green. I gathered firewood and built a proper fire ring, following all the protocols I'd learned in 14 years of backcountry camping. As darkness fell, the forest sounds that had been absent all day suddenly returned. Crickets chirped, an owl hooted somewhere in the distance, and I heard the familiar rustle of night creatures beginning their routines. The normalcy was almost comforting. I was heating up a can of stew when I heard the whistling. It started soft and low, barely audible over the crackling of my fire. A simple melody, something that might have been a lullaby or a work song. Old-fashioned, the kind of tune my great-grandmother might have hummed while working in her garden. The whistling was coming from the tree line, maybe 50 yards from my camp. I grabbed my flashlight and played the beam across the dark wall of forest, but saw nothing except trees and shadows. "Hello?" I called out. "Anyone there?" The whistling stopped. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the crickets had gone quiet. I kept my rifle close as I finished my supper, but nothing else happened. Eventually, the normal night sounds returned, and I managed to convince myself it had been some kind of bird call I'd mistaken for human whistling. I was wrong. I woke up around 2 a.m. to find my fire had died down to glowing embers. The air was cold against my face, and something had changed. It took me a moment to figure out what was different. My compass was spinning. I keep a compass on my nightstand, an old habit from my early ranger days. The needle was rotating slowly but continuously, never settling on magnetic north. As I watched, it began spinning faster, like it was caught in some kind of magnetic storm. That's when I noticed the arrangement. During the night, someone had arranged rocks around my campsite in a perfect circle. Not just any rocks. These were carved with symbols I didn't recognize, though something about them seemed familiar. Cherokee syllabary, maybe, though I'd never learned to read it. I grabbed my rifle and flashlight and did a complete circuit of my camp. The stone circle was maybe 20 feet in diameter, with each carved rock placed with mathematical precision. But there were no footprints, no sign of disturbance in the soft earth around my tent. "Who's there?" I called into the darkness. "I'm a federal ranger. Show yourself." The response came as a whisper that seemed to come from everywhere at once. "Welcome home, cousin." The voice was male, speaking English, but with an accent I couldn't place. Not quite Southern, not quite Cherokee, something older. I swept my flashlight beam across the tree line, but the light seemed to die after just a few feet, swallowed by an unnatural darkness. The forest beyond my camp mig could as well have been an endless void. "What do you want?" I called out. "The blood remembers," came the whispered response. "Even when the mind forgets." A branch snapped somewhere behind me. I spun around, rifle raised, and caught a glimpse of movement at the edge of my vision. Something tall and thin moving between the trees with a flowing, almost liquid grace. I fired a warning shot into the air. The crack of the rifle echoed through the forest, but instead of the expected silence that follows gunfire, I heard something that raised every hair on my body. Laughter, low, amused chuckling that seemed to come from multiple directions at once. "Iron and fire," the voice whispered. "The old ways always return to the old ways." I spent the rest of the night sitting with my back to the fire, rifle across my knees, scanning the darkness. The stone circle remained unchanged, but I could feel eyes watching me from the forest. Patient eyes, as if whatever was out there had all the time in the world. Dawn came slowly, the darkness retreating inch by inch until normal daylight filled the forest. The oppressive feeling of being watched faded with the shadows, and when I examined the stone circle in proper light, I found something that chilled me to the bone. The symbols carved on the rocks weren't Cherokee syllabary. They were older, cruder, but I recognized them now. My great-grandmother had carved similar marks on the doorframe of her cabin, protective symbols, she'd called them, to keep evil spirits away. But these symbols were different. Where hers had been carved to keep something out, these were clearly meant to keep something in. And I was standing in the middle of the circle. I broke camp as quickly as I could, but as I packed my gear, I found something that hadn't been there the night before. Tucked into my sleeping bag was a piece of bark, with more symbols carved into it. These I could read because my great-grandmother had taught me a few words of the old language when I was small. Galun Isti, Come home. The message was signed with a single symbol that made my hands shake as I traced it with my finger. It was our family mark, the sign my great-grandmother had used to mark her possessions and her letters. A symbol I'd only seen once before, carved into the headstone of her grave. Someone up on Copper Ridge knew who I was. Someone who shouldn't exist was calling me home to a place I'd never been. I should have hiked straight back to my truck and driven to town. Should have radioed Bill Crawford and told him to classify Copper Ridge as off-limits pending further investigation. Should have done a lot of things that might have saved me from what came next. Instead, I started tracking. The morning light revealed signs I'd missed in the darkness. Footprints, sometimes human, sometimes animal, leading away from my campsite toward the higher elevations of the ridge. The tracks changed as I followed them, morphing from bare human feet to something with claws, then back again. It was like tracking two different creatures that somehow shared the same path. The trail led me through dense stands of oak and hickory, past abandoned mine shafts that gaped like empty eye sockets in the mountainside. The higher I climbed, the more signs of old habitation I found. Stone foundations covered in moss, bits of rusted metal that might have been tools or weapons, and everywhere the same carved symbols I'd found around my camp. This had been the Melungeon settlement, I realized. These ruins were all that remained of the community that had vanished overnight in 1823. According to the historical records I'd found, over 60 people had lived here, men, women, and children who had simply walked away from their homes and never returned. But someone had returned. Someone was still here. I found the first clear evidence around midday when I discovered a deer carcass near what had once been the settlement's main well. The animal had been killed recently, within the last few hours, but not by any predator I'd ever encountered. The deer had been opened with surgical precision, its organs removed and arranged in a careful pattern on a flat stone nearby. But the strangest thing was the meat. Large portions had been carved away, but not randomly. Someone had taken specific cuts the way a skilled butcher might prepare a carcass. Someone who knew exactly what they were doing, and someone who preferred their meat raw. Blood still pooled in the deer's body cavity, drawing flies in the afternoon heat. I was photographing the scene when I heard footsteps behind me. I spun around, rifle ready, but saw nothing except trees and shadows. The footsteps continued, but a steady, measured pace circling my position. But no matter which direction I turned, I couldn't see their source. "I know you're there," I called out. "Why don't you show yourself?" The footsteps stopped. In the silence that followed, I became aware of how completely alone I was. No radio contact, no backup, no way to call for help if things went wrong. The smart thing would be to retreat, get back to civilization, and bring a full team back to investigate. But something kept me rooted in place. A feeling I couldn't shake, that running away would be the worst mistake of my life. "Your family," the voice said, much closer now. I still couldn't see the speaker, but he sounded like he was standing just a few feet away. "The blood calls to blood. Can't you feel it?" And the terrible thing was, I could feel it. A strange tingling in my veins, a restlessness I'd never experienced before. My senses seemed sharper. I could smell the copper scent of the deer's blood, hear the heartbeat of a rabbit hiding 30 yards away, taste the approaching storm on the wind. "What are you?" I asked. "What we've always been," came the reply. "What you are, if you'd stop fight. Ting it." A branch moved at the edge of my vision. I turned toward it and caught my first clear look at the creature that had been stalking me. He looked human at first glance, a man in his 40s with dark hair and sun-weathered skin. But the proportions were wrong. His arms hung too long, his fingers were too thin, and when he smiled, I saw teeth that belonged in a predator's mouth rather than a human's. But it was his eyes that nearly made me drop my rifle. They were the same unusual pale green as my great-grandmother's eyes, the same eyes I saw in the mirror every morning. "My name is Josiah," he said, stepping fully into view. "Josiah Melungeon, and you, cousin, are finally home." He was naked, I realized, but seemed completely comfortable with it. His body was lean and muscular, covered in old scars that formed patterns across his chest and arms. Ritual scars, cut with purpose rather than received by accident. "That's impossible," I said, though my voice sounded weak even to me. "The settlement was abandoned in 1823. You'd have to be nearly 150 years old." Josiah laughed, and the sound was like wind through autumn leaves. "Time moves differently for our kind, cousin. We age when we choose to age, change when we need to change." He began walking around me in a slow circle, and I noticed his feet were bare but showed no sign of the rough treatment they should have received from walking on rocky ground and forest debris. "Your great-grandmother was my sister," he continued, "Rebecca Melungeon, though she took your great-grandfather's name when she married. She was the last to leave, you know, held out longer than the rest of us." "Leave?" "The records say the settlement was abandoned." "Abandoned." Josiah stopped walking and fixed me with those unsettling pale eyes. "Is that what the white man's books say? That we abandoned our homes?" He gestured toward the ruins around us. "We didn't abandon anything, cousin. We were driven out, forced to choose between hiding what we were or watching our children burn for witchcraft." The PIs were starting to fit together in my mind, forming a picture I didn't want to see. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying your great-grandmother knew what you are, knew what you could become. Why do you think she taught you to track so well? Why do you think you can find animals that hide from other men?" He was right, and that terrified me. I'd always been unnaturally good at tracking, able to follow trails that other rangers couldn't even see. I'd assumed it was just experience and natural talent. "The gift skips generations sometimes," Josiah continued, "but it always returns. Your great-grandmother hoped you'd never need to use it, so she never taught you how. But the blood remembers, even when the mind forgets." That's when the pain started. It began as a tingling in my fingers and toes, then spread up my arms and legs like electricity. My vision sharpened until I could see individual leaves on trees 50 yards away. Sounds became almost painfully clear. I could hear Josiah's heartbeat, the rustle of insects in the underbrush, the whisper of wind through bird feathers high overhead. "What's happening to me?" I gasped. "You're coming home," Josiah said gently. "Finally." My bones began to ache, like they were stretching inside my skin. Looking down at my hands, I saw my fingernails had grown longer and harder, more like claws. When I touched my face, my teeth felt different, sharper. "Fight it if you want," Josiah said. "Rebecca did for 40 years. But the change will come whether you accept it or not. The only choice is whether you'll hate yourself for what you are, or learn to embrace the gift." I raised my rifle, though my hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold it steady. "Stay away from me." Josiah smiled sadly. "Cousin, that gun can't hurt me. And even if it could, you're not going to shoot family." He was right. Despite everything, the fear, the impossibility of what I was seeing, some deep part of me recognized him, recognized the connection between us that went deeper than blood or genetics. But I wasn't ready to accept what that meant. I ran. Crashing through the underbrush like a spooked deer, I abandoned all my ranger training and fled down the mountainside. Behind me, I could hear Josiah's laughter echoing through the trees, but he didn't follow. He didn't need to. The changes were accelerating. By the time I reached my truck, my clothes felt wrong against my skin. Too tight, too confining. My boots were agony on feet that seemed to be reshaping themselves. But worse than the physical changes was what was happening to my mind. I could smell things I'd never noticed before. The individual sense of every animal that had passed this way in the last week. The fear sweat of the survey team when they'd fled. And underneath it all, a rich, complex odor that called to something primal in my brain. The scent of home. I fumbled with my truck keys, hands that no longer felt entirely human. The engine turned over on the third try, and I floored the accelerator, desperate to get back to civilization before whatever was happening to me went too far to reverse. But as I drove down the winding mountain road, I began to realize that civilization was the last place I should go. The smells of car exhaust and hot asphalt made me nauseous. The sound of the engine was too loud, too harsh. And when I caught sight of myself in the rearview mirror, I nearly drove off the road. My eyes had changed. They were still pale green, but now they reflected light like an animal's. My face looked thinner, more angular, and when I smiled nervously at my reflection, my teeth were definitely longer and sharper than they'd been that morning. I pulled over at a rest stop 10 miles from town and sat in my truck, trying to figure out what to do. Call Bill Crawford? Drive to the hospital? Both options seemed impossible. How do you explain to people that you're turning into something that shouldn't exist? That's when I noticed the other vehicles in the parking lot. 3 cars, all empty, all with their doors standing open. A family sedan with child safety seats in the back. A motorcycle with Tennessee plates. A pickup truck with camping gear scattered around it like the occupants had fled in panic. And the smell of fear was everywhere. I got out of my truck and followed the scent trail. It led from the parking lot into the woods, where I found them. A family of 4, parents and 2 young children, huddled behind a fallen log. They were alive, but terrified, staring at something in the trees above them. When they saw me, the father raised a hunting rifle with shaking hands. "Don't come any closer," he warned. "There's something wrong with this place, something in the trees." I looked up and saw Josiah perched on a thick branch 20 feet above us, balanced there as casually as if he were standing on solid ground. In the daylight, his inhuman proportions were even more obvious. His arms and legs were too long, his fingers ended in claws, and his spine curved in a way that suggested it had more vertebrae than it should. But it was still unmistakably a face I recognized, family features I'd seen in old photographs. "Let them go," I called up to him. "They wandered into our territory," Josiah replied. "Came looking for the survey team that never made it back to town." The survey team. In my panic, I'd forgotten about the 3 men who'd been working on Copper Ridge. "Where are they?" Josiah smiled, showing those predator teeth. "Safe, learning what they need to learn." A sound from deeper in the woods made my enhanced hearing prick up. Footsteps, but not quite human. 3 sets of them, moving through the forest with the confident gait of natural predators. The survey team emerged from the tree line, but they'd changed. Like Josiah, their proportions had shifted, their faces had become more angular, and they moved with an inhuman grace. But unlike Josiah, they looked confused, frightened by their transformation. "This is what happens to anyone who spends too much time on our land," Josiah explained. "The old magic is still strong up there. Strong enough to awaken the gift in those who carry even a trace of the blood." One of the surveyor creatures I recognized as Jimmy Martinez approached the terrified family. His hands had become claws, but his eyes were still human, still horrified by what he was becoming. "Help me," he whispered to me. "I can't control it. I can't stop changing." That's when I understood the real horror of the situation. This wasn't just about me discovering some family secret. Josiah was spreading the curse, infecting others, building some kind of pack or clan from anyone unfortunate enough to wander into his territory. "You can't do this to innocent people," I said. "Innocent?" Josiah dropped from his branch, landing silently on the forest floor. "They came to survey our land for development, to bring machines and concrete and parking lots to the last place on earth where the old ways survive." He gestured toward the transformed surveyors. "Now they understand what they would have destroyed. Now they're part of it." The father with the rifle was backing away, trying to shield his family. But there was nowhere to run. Josiah's pack had surrounded them, moving with the coordinated precision of wolves. "Choose, cousin," Josiah said to me. "Help me protect what's ours, or watch these people become what you're trying so hard not to be." I could feel the change pulling at me. Stronger now. My bones ached, my muscles stretched, and part of me, a growing part, wanted to give in, to let go of my human identity and embrace whatever I was becoming. But looking at that terrified family, at the confused agony in the transformed surveyor's eyes, I knew I couldn't let it happen. I raised my rifle and pointed it at Josiah. "Let them go, all of them." He laughed. "That won't work, cousin. We're family. You can't kill family." He was right about the gun. When I pulled the trigger, the bullet passed right through him like he was made of smoke. But he was wrong about family. "I'm not trying to kill you," I said. "I'm trying to save you." The Silver Ranger's badge on my chest was getting warm. My great-grandmother's protective symbols, I realized, the ones she'd carved into the doorframe of her cabin. She'd given me the same protection, worked into the metal of my badge when I'd first become a ranger. Josiah noticed it too. His eyes widened as the badge began to glow with a soft, steady light. "Rebecca," he whispered. "She prepared you." The light spread outward from the badge, washing over the transformed surveyors. Where it touched them, their altered features began to revert. Jimmy Martinez's claws shortened back into human fingers. His elongated limbs returned to normal proportions. But the light was having a different effect on me. Instead of reversing my changes, it was accelerating them. My great-grandmother hadn't given me protection from the curse. She'd given me control over it. I felt my spine extend, my limbs stretch, my senses explode into hypernatural clarity. But unlike the others, I remained myself. Still Luke Pemberton, still human where it counted, but now something more as well. Josiah backed away as the light from my badge grew brighter. "You can't fight what you are forever, cousin." "I'm not fighting it," I said, my voice deeper now, carrying harmonics that made the trees around us rustle without any wind. "I'm choosing what to do with it." The transformation completed itself in a rush of pain and power that left me gasping. When it was over, I stood 7 feet tall with strength that could bend steel and senses that could track a mouse through a thunderstorm. But my mind was still my own. Josiah stared at me with something approaching awe. "The true gift," he said. "Rebecca had knew. She always knew." I looked down at the terrified family, then at the surveyors who were slowly returning to human form. "This ends here. No more hunting innocent people. No more spreading the curse. And if I refuse?" I smiled and felt my new teeth gleam in the afternoon sunlight. "Then you'll learn that sometimes the student surpasses the teacher." Josiah left that night, disappearing into the deep woods like he'd never existed. But before he went, he told me the rest of the story. The Melungeon settlement hadn't been abandoned in 1823. It had been attacked by locals who feared what they didn't understand. Most of the families had fled to other states, hiding their heritage and their gifts. But some, like Josiah, had stayed behind, becoming guardians of the old places and the old ways. "The land remembers," he'd said. "Even when the people forget, someone has to keep watch." Now that someone was me. I drove the family and the surveyors back to town, helping them craft a story that would explain their missing time without mentioning shapeshifters or ancient curses. A gas leak, we told the authorities, hallucinations and disorientation that required medical attention. The development project was quietly canceled. My official report cited unstable geological conditions and potential environmental hazards. Bill Crawford accepted my recommendation without question. He'd worked with me long enough to trust my judgment. But the real reason Copper Ridge remains undeveloped is because I'm there now, watching from the shadows, making sure curious hikers and ambitious developers understand that some places are meant to be left alone. The changes are permanent, I've learned. I can shift between human and something else at will now, though I mostly stay human when dealing with other people. The enhanced senses and strength remain even in human form, making me a better ranger than I ever was before. Sometimes, on nights when the moon is full, I feel the pull of the wild places. I run through the forest on legs that were meant for speed, hunt with inks older than civilization, and remember what it felt like when the world was younger and stranger than it is today. I've found others like me over the years, descendants of the old families who carry the gift but never learned to use it. I help them understand what they are, teach them control, give them the choice my great-grandmother never had. Because that's what she really gave me, I think. Not just the power to change, but the wisdom to choose when and how to use that power. The badge she had blessed sits on my desk at home now, retired from active duty but still glowing faintly in the darkness. A reminder that some kinds of protection run deeper than laws or regulations. And late at night, when I'm patrolling the ridge where my ancestors once lived, I sometimes hear whistling in the distance. Josiah, letting me know he's still out there, still watching, still guarding the places where the old magic runs strong. We're family, after all, and family looks out for family, even when they disagree about methods. The Melungeon shapeshifter of Copper Ridge isn't a monster story I've come to understand. It's a story about choices, about accepting who you are while choosing who you want to be, and about the responsibilities that come with power, especially power that runs in the blood. These days, when people ask me about the strange reports that still come in from the deep woods, glimpses of something that might be human, might be animal, might be something in between, I just smile and tell them the same thing my great-grandmother used to say. The mountains keep their own secrets. Best to let sleeping dogs lie. But I know the truth. The mountains aren't keeping secrets at all. They're keeping guardians. And as long as there are wild places that need protecting, there will be people like me to watch over them. People who remember that being human doesn't mean for getting where we came from, or what we might become if we're brave enough to embrace the gifts we've been given. The blood remembers, even when the mind forgets. But sometimes, if you're very lucky, both the blood and the mind remember together. And that's when the real magic happens. My name is Clayton Ridgway, but everyone calls me Clay. I've been a forest ranger for 19 years now, and I thought I'd seen everything these Georgia mountains could throw at me. I was wrong. September 1959 was when it all started. I remember the date because it was right after Labor Day, when the tourists finally cleared out and left us with some peace. I was 45 then, getting gray around the edges, but still strong enough to hike 20 miles through rough country if I had to. Blood Mountain was my territory. At 4,458 feet, it's the highest peak in northern Georgia, and it earned its name honestly. The Cherokee and Creek tribes fought bloody battles up there for generations before the white man ever showed up. My grandmother used to tell me stories about that mountain when I was little. She was half Cherokee herself, though she never talked much about it. Said some things were better left buried. I'd been working the Chattahoochee National Forest since 1940, right after I got back from the war. The Pacific Theater taught me how to shoot straight and stay alive in bad situations, but nothing over there prepared me for what I'd face on Blood Mountain. The call came in on a Tuesday morning. Park headquarters radioed that some hikers had reported seeing something strange up on the Appalachian Trail near the summit. The description was pretty wild. They claimed they saw a giant cat walking on two legs like a man. Probably just a black bear standing up to get a better look at them, I told my supervisor, Jim Patterson. City folks see a bear rear up on its hind legs and their imagination runs wild. Jim laughed. That's what I figured too. But we've got to check it out. You know how these stories spread. Pretty soon we'll have reporters up here looking for the Georgia Bigfoot. I packed my gear and headed up the mountain that afternoon. The trail was familiar, as my own backyard. I'd walked it thousands of times, but something felt different that day. The woods were too quiet. Usually you'd hear birds, squirrels chattering, the buzz of insects. That day, it was like the whole mountain was holding its breath. About halfway up, I found the first sign that something was wrong. Claw marks on a big oak tree about 8 feet off the ground. They were deep, cutting right through the bark into the wood beneath. I'd seen bear claw marks before, but these were different. Bigger, sharper, and too high up for any bear I knew about. I took some photos and measurements, then kept climbing. The higher I got, the more uneasy I felt. It wasn't just the silence. It was like something was watching me, following me. I kept turning around, but there was never anything there. As the sun started getting low, I made camp at one of the trail shelters about a mile from the summit. I'd planned to spend the night and finish my investigation the next morning. I built a small fire and heated up some beans for dinner, trying to shake off the weird feeling that had been following me all day. That's when I heard it for the first time, a sound that wasn't quite human and wasn't quite animal. It started low, like a woman humming, then rose higher into something that might have been a cat's yowl. But underneath it all, there were words. I couldn't make them out, but they were definitely words. I grabbed my flashlight and rifle and stepped outside the shelter. "Hello? Anyone out there?" The sound stopped. The forest went dead silent again. I waited, listening hard, but heard nothing except my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. I told myself it was just wind through the trees or maybe a screech owl. But I'd lived in these mountains my whole life, and I knew every sound they made. This was something new, something wrong. I didn't sleep much that night. A little sound had me reaching for my rifle. A twig snapping, leaves rustling, the normal sounds of the forest that shouldn't have bothered me at all. But they did. Something had changed. On Blood Mountain. And every instinct I'd developed in 19 years of ranger work was telling me to be ready for trouble. Just before dawn, I heard footsteps outside the shelter. Not the shuffling gait of a bear or the quick patter of deer. These were deliberate, measured steps. Walking upright, I grabbed my rifle and eased to the shelter entrance. The sky was just starting to lighten, that gray time when you can see shapes but not details. About 30 yards away, something moved between the trees. It was tall, at least 6 feet, and covered in dark fur. But it wasn't walking like any animal I'd ever seen. It moved like a person, with purpose and intelligence. As I watched, it stopped and turned toward the shelter. That's when I saw the eyes. Yellow, like a cat's, but larger. And they were looking right at me with an intelligence that made my blood run cold. This wasn't just some animal. This thing was thinking. We stared at each other for what felt like hours, but was probably only seconds. Then it made that sound again, that mix of human voice and animal cry. This time I could almost make out words. It sounded like a warning. I raised my rifle, not to shoot, but to look through the scope. But as soon as I did, the lens fogged over completely. I wiped it clean and looked again, but the fog came right back. When I lowered the rifle, the creature was gone. I spent the rest of the morning searching the area where I'd seen it. The ground was soft from recent rain, and I found tracks. They were like nothing in any animal guide I'd ever studied. About the size of a man's footprint, but with clear claw marks at the front. And they showed the creature had been walking on 2 legs, not 4. I followed the trail for about a quarter mile before it disappeared onto bare rock. But I'd seen enough to know this wasn't a bear or any other normal animal, whatever was up on Blood Mountain. It was something completely outside my experience. When I got back to headquarters that afternoon, I filed my report carefully. I described the claw marks on the trees and the unusual tracks, but I didn't mention seeing the creature itself. Jim Patterson would have thought I'd lost my mind, but word was already spreading among the locals. Over the next few days, I got 3 more reports of sightings. A couple from Atlanta claimed they saw a giant cat person watching them from the tree line. A local hunter found his deer stand torn apart with those same oversized claw marks gouged into the wood. Most disturbing was the report from old Joseph Ridge, one of the Cherokee elders who still lived down in the valley. He came to see me personally, which was unusual. Joseph didn't truck with white authority much. "You seen the Wampas cat?" he said without preamble when he walked into my office. "The what?" "Wampas cat. She's come back to Blood Mountain." Joseph's weathered face was serious. "My grandfather told me stories about her. Said she was a Cherokee woman once, before the curse." I leaned back in my chair. "Joseph, you know I respect your people's traditions, but I need to deal with facts here. There's some kind of large predator on that mountain, and I need to figure out what it is before someone gets hurt." Joseph shook his head. "Kala won't hurt nobody unless they threaten the mountain. She's been gone for many years, but something's brought her back. Something that don't belong up there." "Kayla?" "The woman she used to be. Story goes that she tried to spy on the men's sacred ceremonies, wanted to learn the secrets that were forbidden to women. The medicine man caught her and cursed her, half woman, half cat, bound to guard the sacred places forever. I'd heard versions of this story from my grandmother when I was young, though she'd never used the name Wampas cat. Cherokee folklore was full of spirits and curses, most of them warnings to keep people away from dangerous places. Joseph, even if I believed in this Wampas cat business, why would she come back now? The Cherokee haven't used Blood Mountain for ceremonies in decades. Joseph's dark eyes fixed on mine. Something's wrong up there, Clay. Something that don't belong. Kala knows. She's trying to protect what's sacred. That evening, I decided to go back up the mountain. Not officially. I couldn't justify another overnight trip based on Cherokee legends. But I needed to know what was really going on up there. I hiked up in the late afternoon, planning to reach the summit just before dark. If this creature was nocturnal, that's when I'd most likely see it again. I was about 100 yards from the top when I heard voices. Human voices, and they weren't supposed to be there. The trail was officially closed for maintenance, and I hadn't issued any permits for that area. I moved closer, staying quiet. Through the trees I could see 3 men with chainsaws and logging equipment. They were cutting down old-growth hardwoods, trees that had been standing for centuries and were supposed to be protected. As I watched, one of them pointed up the slope. "We need to get that big oak next. That's some prime timber right there." I was about to step out and confront them when I heard that sound again. The Wampas cat's cry, closer and louder than before. The loggers stopped working and looked around nervously. "What the hell was that?" one of them whispered. "Probably just a wild cat," another replied, but his voice was shaky. Then I saw her. The creature emerged from the thick rhododendron, moving with fluid grace despite her size. In the fading light, I could see her more clearly than before. She was covered in dark fur, but her face was almost human. A woman's features stretched and changed, but still recognizable. Her yellow eyes burned with intelligence and rage. She rose to her full height and let out a scream that was part human anguish and part wild, animal fury. The sound echoed off the mountain peaks like something from a nightmare. The loggers grabbed their gear and ran, crashing through the underbrush in their panic to get away. In seconds, they were gone, leaving their expensive equipment scattered around the illegal cutting site. The Wampas cat, Kala, turned and looked directly at me. For a moment, I thought she might attack. But instead, she tilted her head, studying me. Then she made a different sound, softer, almost like she was trying to talk. I found myself stepping forward. "You're trying to protect the mountain, aren't you?" She nodded, actually nodded, like she understood every word. Then she pointed toward the scattered logging equipment with one clawed hand and shook her head. "They don't belong here," I said. Another nod. Then she pointed at me and made a questioning sound. "I'm supposed to protect it too," I told her. "It's my job." For the first time, her fearsome expression softened slightly. She made one more sound. Definitely words this time, though in a language I didn't recognize. Cherokee, maybe. Then she melted back into the forest as silently as she'd appeared. I stood there for a long time trying to process what had just happened. Whatever Kala was, she wasn't the mindless monster I'd expected. She was a guardian, just like Joseph had said, and somehow she knew I was on her side. The next morning I hiked back up to collect the abandoned logging equipment as evidence. The chainsaws alone were worth thousands of dollars. Professional grade gear, not something weekend timber poachers would be using. This was organized crime, probably backed by someone with serious money. I called in the illegal logging to my supervisor, but I left out the part about the Wampas cats scaring them off. Jim Patterson was already skeptical enough about the creature sightings without me adding to his outs about my mental state. "Any idea who's behind it?" Jim asked when I showed him the photos of the illegal cutting. "I'm working on it. But whoever they are, they've got expensive equipment, and they know these mountains well enough to work at night without getting lost." What I didn't tell Jim was that I'd been thinking about this all night. The timing wasn't a coincidence. The Wampas cat sightings had started just a few weeks ago, around the same time the illegal logging probably began. Joseph Ridge had been right. Something that didn't belong on Blood Mountain had brought Kala back. Over the next few days, I made a point of talking to other rangers and local hunters. Everybody had heard the stories about strange sounds and sightings on Blood Mountain, but most were afraid to go up there and investigate. The few who had tried reported the same thing I'd experienced, an overwhelming sense of being watched, followed by glimpses of something large and impossible moving through the trees. But I also heard other stories. Equipment gone missing from hunting camps. Illegal hunting stands torn apart with those distinctive claw marks. And always that haunting cry echoing across the mountain at night. The Wampas cat wasn't just scaring off the loggers. She was systematically driving away anyone who didn't belong on her mountain. On Thursday night, I got a call from the state police. 3 men had shown up at the hospital in Dahlonega, claiming they'd been attacked by a monster on Blood Mountain. They had claw marks on their backs and arms, not deep enough to be life-threatening, but definitely made by something with very sharp claws. I drove over to interview them. They were the same 3 loggers I'd seen running from the illegal cutting site, though I didn't let on that I knew that. It was huge, one of them told me, his arm in a sling. 6 feet tall, maybe more. Looked like a giant cat, but it walked upright like a person. Where exactly did this happen? I asked. They exchanged nervous glances. We were camping. Just enjoying Tahoe Mountains. With chainsaws? The man's face went pale. I don't know what you're talking about. I leaned forward. Look, I found your equipment up there. Professional logging gear worth more than most people make in a year. You want to tell me what you were really doing on Blood Mountain? The leader of the group, a heavy-set man with a thick beard, finally spoke up. We got hired to cut some specific trees. Big old hardwoods. The guy said he had permits. What guy? Never gave us his real name. Called himself Mr. Smith. Paid cash, half up front. Said it was all legal, just some selective harvesting. I'd heard enough. These weren't criminal masterminds. They were just hired muscle who'd gotten in over their heads. The real question was, who had hired them, and why they were specifically targeting the old-growth trees on Blood Mountain. That night, I decided to stake out the logging site. If Mr. Smith was paying good money for those specific trees, he'd probably send another crew to finish the job and recover the expensive equipment. I hiked up just before sunset and found a good hiding spot with a clear view of the clearing where the abandoned chainsaws were still sitting. Then I settled in to wait. Around midnight, I heard vehicles coming up the old logging road. Headlights flickered through the trees as 3 pickup trucks made their way toward the cutting site. I counted at least 8 men when they got out, and they were all armed. Find that equipment and get it loaded, one of them ordered. We'll come back tomorrow night with more men and finish this job. What about that thing that attacked Jimmy and the others? Another voice asked. Just a bear or something. Couple of rifle shots will scare it off. I was reaching for my radio to call for backup when I heard the sound. That low, mournful cry that had become so familiar. But this time it was different. Rent. Angrier. More threatening. The Wampas cat emerged from the tree line like something out of a nightmare. In the harsh glare of the truck headlights, she looked even more terrifying than before. Her yellow eyes reflected the light as she rose to her full height and let out a scream that seemed to shake the very mountains. The men opened fire immediately. I saw muzzle flashes lighting up the darkness as they emptied their rifles at her, but the bullets didn't seem to have any effect. She moved with inhuman speed, covering the distance to the trucks in seconds. What happened next was chaos. Men screaming, metal tearing, the sounds of vehicles being destroyed. I couldn't see clearly in the darkness, but I could hear the Wampas cat's claws ripping through steel like it was paper. Then the headlights went out, and everything went silent. I waited, hardly daring to breathe. After what felt like hours, I heard footsteps approaching my hiding spot. Slow, deliberate steps. I know you're there, Ranger. The voice was female, with only a slight growl to it, more human than I'd heard from her before. I stood up slowly, keeping my hands visible. Kayla? She stepped into a patch of moonlight, and I got my first clear look at her face. It was definitely a woman's face, but changed, stretched. Her features were sharp and predatory, with prominent canine teeth and those burning yellow eyes. But there was intelligence there, and pain. "They keep coming," she said, her voice rough from disuse. "More and more of them. They want to destroy everything sacred." "Who's hiring them? Who's Mr. Smith?" She tilted her head, considering. "A man with much money and no respect for the old ways. He thinks he can buy anything, even sacred ground." "Can you tell me his real name?" "Names have power, but I can show you where he lives." She looked toward the trucks, which I could now see were completely destroyed. "These men will not return, but others will come." I looked around at the wreckage. What happened to them? The men? They ran into the forest. Some may find their way out. Some may not. Her expression was unreadable. "I did not kill them. That is not my purpose. But I cannot protect them from the mountain itself if they choose to stay." She was right. Blood Mountain was no place to be wandering around lost in the dark. The terrain was rough, full of cliffs and ravines. Even experienced hikers could get into serious trouble up there at night. "Why are you helping me?" I asked. "You protect the mountain too, and—" She paused, studying my face in the moonlight. "You have Cherokee blood. I can smell it." I thought of my grandmother and her stories. My grandmother was Cherokee. Kala nodded. She would have understood. The mountain remembers all who love it. She turned to go, then looked back. "Tomorrow night, the one who calls himself Smith will come personally. He grows desperate. That is when he will be most dangerous. Will you help me stop him?" For the first time, something that might have been a smile crossed her strange features. "We will stop him together, grandson of the Cherokee." Then she vanished into the darkness, leaving me alone with the destroyed trucks and the knowledge that tomorrow night would bring the final confrontation. The next day I tried to piece together what I knew about Mr. Smith and his operation. The destroyed trucks had been stripped of license plates and registration, but I managed to trace the vehicle identification numbers through state police contacts. They belonged to a logging company based in Atlanta, Highland Timber Corporation. A few phone calls revealed that Highland Timber was owned by a wealthy businessman named Marcus Whitmore. On paper, his company specialized in selective harvesting on private land. But I'd heard rumors about Whitmore for years, stories about bribes, forged permits, and timber theft on public lands across North Georgia. What I couldn't figure out was why he was specifically targeting Blood Mountain. There were plenty of places with valuable hardwood that would be easier to access and less likely to attract attention. The Cherokee considered Blood Mountain sacred, which meant any commercial activity there would face legal challenges and protests, unless Whitmore knew something I didn't. I spent the afternoon researching property records and old mining surveys. What I found made my blood run cold. In 1924, a geological survey had identified significant mineral deposits on Blood Mountain, not just iron and quartz, but rare earth elements that were becoming increasingly valuable for electronics and military applications. Whitmore wasn't just stealing timber. He was using the logging operation as cover to survey the mineral deposits and establish mining rights. If he could prove the land had been developed for commercial use, he could challenge the federal protection status and potentially gain access to millions of dollars worth of rare minerals. The old-growth trees weren't valuable for their wood. They were valuable because cutting them down would destroy the Cherokee cultural sites that gave Blood Mountain its protected status. As the sun set, I made my way back up the mountain for what I knew would be the final confrontation. I'd called for backup, but the nearest state police were hours away. Whatever happened tonight, I'd have to handle it alone. Or not entirely alone. I was counting on Kala to keep her word. I reached the logging site just as full darkness fell. The destroyed trucks were still there, but someone had been through and salvaged what they could. Fresh tire tracks showed that at least 2 vehicles had been here during the day. I found a good position overlooking the clearing and settled in to wait. About an hour later, I heard engines approaching. This time, it was a convoy. 5 trucks and 2 SUVs with at least 20 men. Marcus Whitmore stepped out of the lead SUV, and I finally got a look at the man behind all this. He was younger than I'd expected, maybe 40, dressed in expensive gear that had never seen real wilderness use. But his eyes were hard, and he moved with the confidence of someone who was used to getting what he wanted. "Get those chainsaws running," he ordered. "I want those trees down and sectioned before dawn, and this time, shoot anything that moves." His men spread out through the clearing, some of them carrying rifles, others hauling cutting equipment. These weren't weekend loggers. They moved like professionals, possibly ex-military. I was reaching for my radio when I heard Whitmore talking to someone on a satellite phone. "Yeah, the surveyor confirmed it. The richest deposits are right here under these old trees. Once we clear the site and file the development claim, the federal protection goes away. We'll be able to strip mine the whole mountain." Strip mine? He wasn't just planning to cut down a few trees. He wanted to destroy the entire mountain, tear it apart to get at the minerals underneath. I'd heard enough. I keyed my radio to call for immediate backup, but all I got was static. Something was jamming the signal. That's when I heard Kala's voice, soft and close to my ear. "They have electronic devices to block your communications." I turned and saw her crouched beside me, somehow having approached without making a sound. In the darkness, she looked more like a shadow than a creature of flesh and blood. "There are too many of them," I whispered. "Too many guns. Numbers do not matter. This is sacred ground, and I am its guardian." Her yellow eyes reflected the lights from the clearing below. "But I will need your help." "What do you want me to do?" "When I give the signal, arrest the leader. Use your authority to make him confess his crimes. I will handle the others." Before I could ask what signal she meant, Kala was gone, melting back into the forest. I heard her moving through the trees, circling the clear ink. Then everything went quiet. The silence stretched on until even Whitmore's men started looking nervous. Chainsaws fell silent as the operators looked around, trying to figure out why. The forest had gone dead quiet. "Keep working," Whitmore snapped. "It's just the local wildlife hiding from the noise." That's when Kala made her move. Her scream echoed across the mountain like the voice of the mountain itself. Not just angry, but ancient and powerful. It seemed to come from everywhere at once, as if the very rocks were crying out in pain. The men froze, looking around wildly. Then Kala appeared at the edge of the clearing, and several of them opened fire immediately. But she wasn't there anymore. She moved like liquid shadow, faster than any human could track. I heard the sounds of metal being torn apart, men shouting in terror, rifles firing at empty air. Whitmore pulled out a pistol and started shooting blindly into the darkness. "It's just an animal! Kill it!" That was my cue. I stood up from my hiding spot and aimed my rifle directly at him. "Drop your weapon! Federal agent!" Whitmore spun toward me, his face twisted with rage and fear. You're working with that thing." "I'm protecting this mountain from criminals like you. Drop the gun and call off your men." Instead, he raised his pistol toward me. "You have no idea what you're interfering with. This mountain is worth millions. Not if I have to strip mine it to death." Around us, chaos continued as Kala systematically destroyed their equipment and drove off the armed men. She was careful not to kill anyone, but she made it clear that anyone who stayed would face her claws. "Last chance, Whitmore. Drop the gun." He looked around at his men fleeing into the forest, his expensive equipment destroyed, his plans falling apart. Then his face hardened with desperate rage. "If I can't have this mountain, nobody can." That's when I realized he was holding something else in his other hand. A detonator. "I've got enough explosives planted around this clearing to bring down half the mountainside," he snarled. "Ancient Cherokee sites, rare minerals, protected trees, all gone. At least I'll make sure nobody else profits from it." Time slowed down. I saw his finger tightening on the detonator button. I was too far away to stop him. In seconds, he would destroy everything Kala had spent her cursed existence protecting. Then she was there, moving faster than anything should be able to move. She covered the 20 yards between the tree line and Whitmore in a single bound, her claws extended. but instead of striking him down, she knocked the detonator from his hand and sent it flying into the darkness. Whitmore screamed and tried to shoot her, but she was already gone, vanishing back into the forest. I rushed forward and tackled Whitmore before he could retrieve the detonator. As we struggled, I could hear sirens in the distance. My backup had finally arrived. "You don't understand," Whitmore gasped as I cuffed him. "That thing isn't natural. It's a monster." I looked toward the tree line where Kala had disappeared. "No," I said. "She's a guardian, and you're the monster." The aftermath took months to sort out. Marcus Whitmore was convicted on federal charges of timber theft, environmental destruction, and conspiracy to defraud the government. The rare earth mineral deposits he'd discovered were classified as part of the protected Cherokee cultural sites, putting them permanently off limits to commercial development. Most of his men were never found. They scattered into the forest that night and somehow made their way out of the mountains, but none of them ever talked about what they'd seen. The few who were arrested claimed they couldn't remember anything after the animal attack. The explosive charges Whitmore had planted were located and disarmed by bomb disposal experts. There had been enough C4 hidden around the clearing to level several acres of mountainside. If Kala hadn't stopped him, Blood Mountain would have been scarred forever. I never saw her again after that night, though I've spent countless evenings on the mountain hoping to catch a glimpse of her. Sometimes I hear that mournful cry echoing across the peaks, especially when the moon is full. And sometimes I find offerings left at the old Cherokee sites. Wildflowers, interesting stones, things that suggest someone is still watching over the sacred places. Joseph Ridge passed away the following spring, but before he died, he sought me out one last time. "Kala has found peace," he told me. "The mountain is protected, and she knows there are still those who understand the old ways." "Will she stay?" Joseph smiled. "As long as there are threats to what is sacred, she will be there. But perhaps now she can rest between times of need." I'm 57 now, getting close to retirement. But I still patrol Blood Mountain regularly, and I've trained the younger rangers to recognize the signs. Most of them think I'm just a little eccentric, an old-timer who takes Cherokee folklore too seriously. But sometimes, when new threats emerge, illegal dumping, unauthorized development, treasure hunters with metal detectors, those threats have a way of resolving themselves. Equipment gets destroyed, trespassers get lost and decide to leave the mountains alone, and the protected sites remain undisturbed. The official reports always list the cause as equipment failure or wildlife encounters. But I know better. 3 weeks ago, a mining company filed papers to challenge the federal protection status of Blood Mountain, claiming they'd found new evidence that the Cherokee sites weren't authentic. Their survey team was supposed to start work this week. Yesterday, I found their equipment scattered across the summit trail, torn apart by claws. The surveyors reported being chased by a wild animal and left the mountain immediately. The mining company withdrew their application this morning. Tonight, as I write this report by lamplight in my cabin, I can hear her calling, "Gee," across the mountain. It's not the angry scream she used against Whitmore and his men, but something gentler, almost like she's singing. The Cherokee have a saying, "The mountain remembers all who love it." I think Kala remembers too. She remembers the woman she used to be, the sacred duty that transformed her, and the promise she made to guard what others would destroy. Blood Mountain is safe for now. And somewhere in the rhododendron thickets and granite caves, a guardian keeps her eternal watch. My name is Clayton Ridgway, and I've spent the last 12 years working in partnership with something most people would call impossible. But I know better. The mountains are full of mysteries, and some of them are worth protecting with your life, or with something beyond life entirely. My name is Diana Fairweather, and I've been a park ranger at Mammoth Cave for 8 years. Most people call me Di. I'm the person they send when someone gets lost in the deep parts of the cave system, or when scientists need a guide to study the places tourists never see. I grew up in Louisville, never thinking I'd spend my life underground. But caves are amazing. They're like another world hiding right beneath our feet. Mammoth Cave is the longest cave system on Earth, Over 400 miles of tunnels and chambers we've mapped so far. And we're still finding new passages every year. November in Kentucky means cold mornings and leaves crunching under your boots. I was drinking coffee in the ranger station when my supervisor, Tom Martinez, walked in with a worried look on his face. "Di, we've got a situation," he said, sitting down across from my desk. "Remember that caving group from the university? The ones we gave permits for the Wild Cave section last week?" I nodded. The Wild Cave section is what we call the parts of Mammoth Cave that regular tourists can't visit. You need special training and equipment. It's 400 feet below the normal tour routes, and some of those passages haven't been explored much at all. "They came back yesterday with a strange report," Tom continued. "They say they found fresh footprints in one of the deep chambers, children's footprints." "Kids? How would children get down there? You need ropes and climbing gear just to reach those areas." "That's what I want you to find out. The cavers are experienced. They know what they saw, but they also said something else." Tom paused, looking uncomfortable. "They claim they heard children singing." I almost laughed. "Singing? Tom, sound carries weird in caves. They probably heard their own voices echoing, or maybe some equipment making noise." That's what I thought too. "But Di, these people have been caving for 15 years. They know what echoes sound like. They recorded some of it." He pulled out a small tape recorder and set it on my desk. "Listen to this." He pressed play. "At first I heard the normal sounds of people moving through a cave, boots on rock, heavy breathing, the scrape of equipment. Then, very faintly, I heard something else. Voices. High, clear voices singing something that sounded like a lullaby. But the language wasn't English. It wasn't any language I recognized." "Could be Native American," I said, trying to sound casual. But something about those voices made my skin crawl. They sounded so far away, yet somehow very close. "Maybe Cherokee. There are old legends about this cave system." "Legends?" "Yeah, stories about people living underground. The Cherokee called them Nunyunuwi, the moon-eyed children. Supposed to be pale people with big eyes who lived in caves before humans came to the area. Just old stories, though." Tom didn't look convinced. "Well, whether it's legends or lost kids, we need to check it out. If there are children down there somehow, they could be in serious danger. Those deep chambers can flood without warning, and the temperature stays around 50 degrees year-round." He was right. Even if this was just imagination or tricks of sound, I had to investigate. It's my job to keep people safe in the cave system. "I'll go down tomorrow morning," I said. "Alone, first. If there really are people down there, a big group might scare them. Take a radio and check in every hour. If you don't report back by 5 p.m., I'm sending a rescue team." That night, I lay in bed thinking about those voices on the tape. I'd studied the Cherokee legends in college. The stories said the moon-eyed children were afraid of sunlight and lived deep underground. They were supposed to be peaceful, but would hide from surface people. Most scholars think the legends were just ways to explain strange sounds and shadows in caves. But those voices didn't sound like echoes or equipment noise. They sounded like real children singing a real song. I told myself I was being silly. In 8 years of cave work, I'd never seen anything that couldn't be explained by science. Strange sounds, weird shadows, equipment failures. Caves are full of natural phenomena that can seem supernatural if you don't understand them. Still, I made sure to pack extra batteries for my headlamp. I entered Mammoth Cave at dawn through the back entrance we use for research and rescue work. The main tourist entrance was still closed, so I had the whole cave system to myself. My boots echoed in the empty passages as I made my way toward the Wild Cave section. It takes about an hour of walking and climbing to reach the area where the university team found the footprints. The temperature drops as you go deeper, and you leave all traces of sunlight behind. My headlamp beam danced across limestone walls that were carved by water over millions of years. The passage I needed was called Cathedral Hall because of its high ceiling. Getting there meant crawling through a tight squeeze called Fat Man's Misery, then rappelling down a 60-foot shaft. I'd done it hundreds of times, but today felt different. The cave seemed quieter than usual, like it was holding its breath. When I reached Cathedral Hall, I found the footprints right away. They were in a patch of soft mud near a small underground stream, clear as day. The prints of bare feet, small enough to belong to children between 8 and 12 years old. But there was something wrong with them. Each footprint showed 6 toes. I knelt down and examined them carefully. They weren't fake. The pressure patterns and the way the mud had dried around the edges proved they were real. Someone with 6 toes on each foot had walked through here recently, probably within the last few days. But 6 toes, that was a genetic trait that showed up sometimes, but it was rare. And how had children gotten down at all? The climbing required to reach this chamber was beyond most adults, let alone kids. I followed the trail of prints across the chamber. They led to the far wall, then just stopped. The wall was solid limestone, with no cracks or openings big enough for a person to squeeze through. Yet the footprints ended right at the wall, like whoever made them had walked straight through solid rock. That's when I heard it. Singing. It started very softly, so faint I thought it might be wind moving through the cave. But as I stood still and listened, it got clearer. Children's voices, high and sweet, singing the same melody I'd heard on Tom's tape recorder. The sound seemed to come from everywhere at once, echoing off the walls and ceiling. "Hello?" I called out. "Is someone there? I'm a park ranger. If you need help, I'm here to help you." The singing stopped immediately. The silence that followed felt heavy and strange, like the cave itself was listening. Then I heard footsteps. Not heavy adult footsteps, but the quick, light sounds of children running. The footsteps seemed to come from above me, from the ceiling of the chamber. But that was impossible. The ceiling was 30 feet high and completely smooth. I aimed my headlamp up toward the sound. For just a moment I thought I saw something move across the beam of light. Something pale and quick, like a flash of white cloth. But when I focused the light on that spot, there was nothing there. "I'm not going to hurt you," I said to the darkness. "If you're lost, I can help you get out of the cave safely." A sound came back, not singing this time, but what sounded like whispers. Multiple voices, all very young, speaking in a language I didn't understand. The whispers seemed to move around the chamber, first from my left, then my right, then from behind me. I spun around, trying to follow the sounds with my light. That's when I saw the second set of footprints. These were on the ceiling. Perfect 6-toed footprints, pressed into what should have been solid limestone as if the rock was soft mud. They formed a trail across the entire ceiling of the chamber, from one wall to the other. The prints were fresh, and they were the same size as the ones on the floor. My hands started shaking. I'm a geologist. I understand rock formations and cave systems. There was no natural process that could create footprints in solid limestone, and there was definitely no way for children to walk on the ceiling. The whispering sounds came closer. I heard what sounded like giggling, the kind of sound children make when they're playing hide and seek. But there was something strange about it, something that made my heart race. I pulled out my radio to call Tom, but it was dead. The display showed full battery power that morning, but now it wouldn't turn on at all. My backup flashlight wouldn't work either, even though I'd tested it before entering the cave. The only light I had was my headlamp, and its beam seemed weaker than before. That's when I realized I wasn't alone in the chamber anymore. Something was moving in the shadows at the edge of my light. Not one something, several somethings, staying just out of clear view. I could see pale shapes flitting between the rock formations, always moving, never staying in one place long enough for me to get a good look. "Please," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I just want to make sure you're safe. Are you hurt? Are you hungry?" The movement stopped. The cave became completely silent again. Then, from directly behind me, a child's voice spoke in perfect English. "Why do you come to our home, surface dweller?" I spun around, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. My headlamp beam swept across empty air. There was no one behind me, but the voice had been so close I should have been able to touch whoever spoke. "I'm here to help," I said to the darkness. "My name is Diana. I'm a park ranger. People heard singing down her and we wanted to make sure everyone was okay. Silence. Then, from somewhere above me, "We know who you are, Diana Fairweather. We have watched you in our tunnels for many seasons." The voice was definitely a child's, maybe 10 or 11 years old, but there was something old about it, like the child had lived much longer than their voice suggested. "You've been watching me?" I asked. "How long have you been living down here?" A different voice answered, this one from my left. "We have always been here. Before your people came to the upper world, we were here." More voices joined in, creating a chorus of children speaking from all around me. The Cherokee knew us. They called us the moon-eyed children. We helped them find safe paths through our domain. "But your people forgot the old agreements." I was hearing at least 6 different voices, all children, all speaking from different directions, yet I still couldn't see anyone. "The old agreements?" I asked. "Your people promised to stay in the upper tunnels," said the first voice. "You promised not to bring your loud machines and bright lights to our deep places. You promised not to seal our water sources or block our pathways." I started to understand. "The development project, the underground restaurant they want to build. They will destroy our home," said a voice that sounded younger than the others, maybe 7 or 8 years old. "They will pour poison into our streams and bring the burning lights that hurt our eyes." "I can help with that," I said quickly. "I can write reports saying the area isn't safe for construction. I can protect this place." "Can you?" The first voice sounded closer now. "Your people do not listen to the warnings of stones and streams. They only believe what they can see and touch." "Then show me," I said. "Let me see you, and I'll make them understand." A long pause. Then, "Are you prepared to see, Diana Fairweather? Once you have truly seen us, you cannot pretend we are just echoes and shadows." "I'm prepared." "Close your eyes." I hesitated. Closing my eyes in a dark cave seemed like a terrible idea. But I'd come this far. I closed my eyes and waited. I heard the soft sound of bare feet on stone, moving closer. Then a child's hand touched mine. The skin was cool and smooth, definitely real. But the hand felt strange. The fingers were longer than they should be, and I could feel 6 distinct digits. "Open your eyes now," the voice said. I opened them and looked down. A child was holding my hand, but this wasn't any normal child. The skin was pale as moonlight, almost glowing in the beam of my headlamp. The child was thin and graceful, wearing what looked like clothes made from some kind of soft, light-colored material. But it was the eyes that made me gasp. They were huge, easily twice the size of normal human eyes, and they were solid black with no visible whites. When the beam of my headlamp hit those eyes, they reflected the light like an animal's eyes do at night. "Hello, Diana," the child said. "My name is Whisper in the Deep. I am the speaker for our family." I stared at her. I was pretty sure it was a girl, though it was hard to tell. She looked like she was about 10 years old, but those ancient eyes suggested she might be much older. "How many of you are there?" I managed to ask. 15 in this part of the cave system. We are all that remain of our people. What happened to the others?" Whisper in the Deep's expression grew sad. "Some were lost when your people dammed the underground river in 1962. Others died when the construction machines made the deep tunnels shake and fall. We are the last family." As she spoke, other children began to appear at the edges of my light. They moved with impossible grace, walking on vertical walls as easily as on the floor. Each one had the same pale skin, oversized eyes, and 6-fingered hands. They ranged in age from what looked like 5 years old to maybe 14. "How do you live down here?" I asked. "What do you eat?" "We know every stream and pool in these caves," said an older boy who was hanging upside down from the ceiling. "We catch the blind fish and gather the cave mushrooms. We drink the water that has never seen sunlight. And we remember," added a younger girl. "We remember the songs and stories of our people. We remember the time before the surface dwellers came." I watched them move around the chamber. They seemed to glow with their own faint light, and they made no sound when they walked or climbed. It was beautiful and terrifying at the same time. "Why are you showing yourselves to me?" I asked. "Because time is running short," Whisper in the Deep said. "The construction will begin in 7 days. Once they seal the water source in the Chamber of Echoes, we will die. All of us." "I won't let that happen," I said. "I promise." "Your promises are words in the air," said the boy on the ceiling. "Your people have broken every agreement with our kind. This time will be different." "How?" Whisper in the Deep asked. "You cannot tell them about us. They would cage us like animals or make us into curiosities for their entertainment. You cannot show them our footprints or our home. They would only want to study and change us." She was right. If I told anyone about the moon-eyed children, the cave would be overrun with scientists, reporters, and tourists within a week. These children would lose their home either way. "Then what do you want me to do?" "Help us make them afraid," she said. "Help us show them that some places are not meant for surface dwellers." The other children began to move closer, forming a circle around me. Their black eyes reflected my headlamp beam like stars in the darkness. "What do you mean, make them afraid?" "You will see," Whisper in the Deep said. "But first, you must understand what you are truly dealing with." She gestured to the other children, and they began to sing. It was the same melody I'd heard on the tape, but now I was close enough to understand some of the words. They were singing in Cherokee, but an old form of the language that sounded different from the modern version I'd learned. As they sang, something changed in the chamber. The walls began to glow with the same faint light that surrounded the children. I could see clearly now without my headlamp. The entire room was filled with a soft, blue-white radiance, and I could see that we weren't alone. The walls were covered with drawings, not ancient cave paintings, but fresh images that seemed to move and shift in the strange light. They showed the history of the moon-eyed children, from their earliest days in the caves to their encounters with Native Americans, and finally, to their struggles with modern development. "We are the guardians of the deep places," Whisper in the Deep said. "We have powers your people do not understand. We can speak to the stones and command the waters. We can walk through rock and see in absolute darkness." As she spoke, she stepped backward and disappeared into the solid wall of the cave, then emerged again a few feet away. "We do not wish to harm the surface dwellers," she continued, "but we will protect our home." The singing stopped and the strange light faded. My headlamp seemed incredibly bright after the soft glow, and I had to squint to see the children clearly. "What kind of help do you need from me?" I asked. "Tomorrow the construction workers will come to prepare the Chamber of Echoes," Whisper in the Deep said. "You must guide them here, to our home." "I can't do that if they see you." "They will not see us," interrupted the older boy, "but they will know we are here." I was starting to understand what they had in mind, and it scared me. "You're going to try to frighten them away." "We will show them that this place is protected," said a small girl who couldn't have been more than 6 years old. "We will make them understand that some boundaries should not be crossed." "What if someone gets hurt?" "We do not wish to harm anyone," Whisper in the Deep said. "But if they threaten our water source, our children will die. We must protect ourselves." I thought about it. The construction crew was planning to blast through part of the cave system to create space for an underground restaurant. The plans called for sealing off several natural water sources and installing electric lighting throughout the deep chambers. It would completely destroy the environment these children depended on. "Okay," I said finally. "I'll help. But promise me you won't hurt anyone." "We promise to use only what force is necessary," Whisper in the Deep said. "But Diana, you must promise something as well." "What?" "You must promise to keep our secret no matter what happens, even if your people blame you for what occurs tomorrow." I looked around at all those pale faces and huge dark eyes. These children were the last of their kind, and they were asking me to help them survive. How could I refuse? "I promise." The next morning, I met the construction crew at the cave entrance. There were 5 men with drilling equipment and explosives, plus an engineer to supervise the work. I was supposed to guide them to the Chamber of Echoes and make sure they didn't damage any important geological formations. "Should be a simple job," said the foreman, a big man named Bill Tucker. "We just need to clear out some rock and redirect that underground stream. The restaurant will be gorgeous. Imagine eating dinner 400 feet below ground." I led them through the cave system, following the same route I'd taken the day before. The men were loud and confident, joking about being underground and making fun of the Cherokee legends I tried to tell them about along the way. "Mooneyed children," Bill laughed. "Sounds like something from a horror movie." "Well, next you'll be telling us about ghosts and goblins." "Some of the Cherokee legends are based on real experiences," I said. "Maybe we should be more respectful." "Listen, sweetheart," Bill said. "I've been in construction for 20 years. I've worked in caves, mines, tunnels, you name it. The only thing you need to worry about underground is cave-ins and bad air. Everything else is just stories." When we reached the Chamber of Echoes, the men set up their equipment quickly. The chamber was smaller than Cathedral Hall, but it had the underground stream that the moon-eyed children needed for survival. The plan was to seal off the stream and redirect it to create a waterfall feature for the restaurant. "This is perfect," said the engineer, looking at his blueprints. "We'll blast through that wall there, seal off the stream here, and run electrical conduits along the ceiling." I watched them work and wondered where the children were hiding. I couldn't see or hear any sign of them, but I had the feeling we were being watched. The first sign that something was wrong came when their equipment started failing. The drill bits kept breaking, even though they were designed for limestone. The electric generator kept shutting off for no reason. The men's headlamps began dimming and going out, even with fresh batteries. "What the hell is going on?" Bill muttered, trying to restart the generator for the 3rd time. That's when the singing started. It began very softly, so quiet that I don't think the men noticed at first. But gradually it got louder, the voices of children singing in Cherokee, echoing through the chamber from every direction. "Do you hear that?" asked one of the workers. "Hear what?" Bill replied, but I could see he was listening too. The singing grew louder, and now it was impossible to ignore. The men stopped working and looked around nervously. "It's just echoes from the tourist areas," I said, trying to sound casual. "Sound carries strangely in caves." But the singing wasn't coming from the tourist areas. It was coming from the walls, the sealant, everywhere at once. And it was getting closer. "I don't like this," said the youngest worker. "Maybe we should come back another day." "Don't be ridiculous," Bill snapped. "It's just some acoustic phenomenon. Let's get this done." He picked up a sledgehammer and swung it at the wall where they planned to install the first blast charges. The hammer hit the limestone with a loud crack. The singing stopped immediately. In the sudden silence, we heard something else, the sound of rocks falling. Not from where Bill had hit the wall, but from the ceiling above us. "Everyone back!" I shouted, recognizing the warning signs of a cave-in. But these weren't random falling rocks. As we scrambled away from the wall, stones began dropping in a perfect circle around the construction equipment. It was like the ceiling was targeting the machines specifically while leaving us untouched. "This isn't possible," the engineer whispered. Then the footprints appeared. We watched in stunned silence as 6-toed footprints began forming in the soft mud of the chamber floor. They appeared one by one, as if invisible children were walking all around us. The prints circled our group, then headed toward the sealed-off areas of the cave system. "Okay, that's it," said one of the workers, backing toward the passage we'd entered through. "I'm not staying in a haunted cave." "It's not haunted," Bill said, but his voice was shaking. "There's got to be a logical explanation." That's when the children decided to show themselves. Whisper in the Deep appeared first, materializing out of the solid rock wall like she was made of mist. Her pale skin glowed in the beam of our lights, and her huge black eyes fixed on Bill Tucker. "You are not welcome here," she said in perfect English. The construction workers screamed. 2 of them ran for the exit immediately, not caring about their equipment or their jobs. The engineer stood frozen, staring at Whisper in the Deep like he couldn't believe what he was seeing. More children appeared, emerging from the walls and ceiling with impossible grace. They surrounded the remaining men, their dark eyes reflecting our lights like mirrors. "This is our home," said the older boy I'd met the day before. "You cannot poison our water or seal our pathways." Bill Tucker, to his credit, stood his ground. "I don't know what kind of trick this is, but I've got a job to do." He raised his sledgehammer again, aiming for the wall. "Don't," I warned. "Please, just listen to them." But Bill swung the hammer with all his strength. It struck the limestone and passed right through it, like the rock had become water. Bill stumbled forward, thrown off balance, and found himself standing inside the solid stone wall. He screamed as the rock solidified around him, trapping him up to his waist. He wasn't hurt, but he couldn't move. "Let me out," he yelled. "Let me out right now." "Will you leave our home in peace?" Whisper in the Deep asked. Yes, whatever you want. Just get me out of here." The rock around Bill's waist became soft again, and he stumbled free. He didn't stop to collect his equipment or argue about the job. He ran for the exit as fast as his legs could carry him. The engineer looked at me with wide, terrified eyes. "What are they?" "They're the original inhabitants of this cave system," I said, "and they're asking us to respect their home." He nodded quickly and hurried after the other men, leaving me alone with the mooneyed children. The construction crew never came back. Bill Tucker told his supervisor that the cave was structurally unsound and possibly dangerous. The engineer backed up his report, citing unusual geological conditions that made the project impossible. The underground restaurant was never built. I wrote my own report stating that the Chamber of Echoes showed signs of instability and recommending that the area be permanently closed to development. Tom Martinez accepted my findings without question, and he trusted my expertise, and the construction crew's terrified retreat from the cave system supported my conclusions. 3 weeks later, I returned to Cathedral Hall alone. I brought supplies this time: food, medicine, batteries for equipment that might actually work in the children's presence. I called out when I reached the chamber, and Whisper in the Deep appeared within moments. "Thank you," she said simply. "You kept your promise," I replied. "No one was seriously hurt. We do not wish to be enemies of the surface dwellers. We only wish to survive." I spent several hours with the moon-eyed children that day, learning about their culture and their needs. They showed me more of their hidden chambers, including a vast underground garden where they grew the mushrooms and plants they needed for food. They had developed an entire civilization in the deep parts of the cave system, complete with art, music, and their own form of writing. "We have much to teach about living in harmony with the deep places," Whisper in the Deep told me, "and perhaps much to learn about the changing world above." I became their unofficial guardian and liaison with the surface world. Every few weeks, I would visit their chambers, bringing news from above and making sure their needs were met. In return, they shared their incredible knowledge of the cave system, helping me improve safety protocols and discover new passages. The moon-eyed children kept their promise too. They remained hidden from other visitors to the cave, but they also helped protect lost cavers and warned of dangerous conditions. Several times over the following months, rescue teams found lost explorers who reported being guided to safety by strange echoes and helpful voices in the darkness. I never told anyone the truth about what lived in the deep chambers of Mammoth Cave. As far as the official records show, the moon-eyed children are nothing more than Cherokee legend, but sometimes late at night in my small house near the park, I can hear them singing. Their voices carry up through miles of limestone and reach me in my dreams, reminding me that some mysteries are more important than scientific discovery. The cave system is vast and largely unexplored. Scientists estimate that we've mapped less than half of the total passages in Mammoth Cave. Who knows what other wonders might be hiding in the deepest, darkest places where human footsteps have never echoed. I do know this. The next time construction crews want to develop the deep chambers, they'll have to go through me first. And I'll make sure they understand that some places are meant to remain wild and free, protected by guardians who have called them home for longer than recorded history. The moon-eyed children are still down there, still singing their ancient songs in the darkness. And as long as I'm a ranger at Mammoth Cave, They always will be. Sometimes visitors ask me if I believe in the old Cherokee legends about people living underground. I always smile and tell them that caves are full of mysteries we don't fully understand yet. But late at night, when the tour groups have gone home and the cave system settles into its ancient silence, I know the truth. The legends aren't just stories, they're promises. Promises that some things will endure, no matter how much the world above changes. Promises that there will always be guardians in the deep places, watching and protecting the secrets that matter most. And I intend to keep those promises for as long as I live.